Hello, how you doing everyone? I am going to talk to you today about liberal adult education. I'm going to refer to the same book that I always refer to when it comes to schools of thoughts about adult education, and it is this book. It's Philosophical Foundations of Adult Education, third edition by Doctors John Elias and Sharon Marion. They are very well known in the field of adult education, and they have come a long way with their book, and which is my favorite book to refer to when it comes to schools of philosophy. I will be talking to you about what is liberal adult education in contrast to what other schools, and what are some of its main components, and how it's come to what it is today, and how it matters in life, really. So let's talk about what it is in it. It is the oldest and most enduring philosophy of education. Initially started since Plato's Academy, and it's come all the way to the Great Books program. Some of the programs are found in some of the universities around the country, around the United States, and just a few of them around the world also. But just what matters, what remains important is that this philosophy came or can be dated back up to Plato's Academy and School of Thoughts back then. It is often associated with college education and persists in various forms of contemporary society. In other words, it's all about college education and the educating of the young, and it's about contemporary society. It is about a society who is modern, who is and it is a school of thought that is always associated with different forms of learning. So what does it emphasize? It emphasizes liberal learning. It talks about what liberal learning is, about organized learning, that knowledge can be organized in certain sets, in certain class. And it is the development of intellectual powers of mind. Power of mind is given a great deal of thought, and that is what it emphasizes. Moreover, what are some of the historical developments? Let's take a look about where it's been found. Well, it's been found in contrasts between educational theory of sophists and classical approaches of Socrates. Of course, the sophists and the Platos and the Aristotle. So what matters here is, what did the sophists say? So let's take a look at what they specifically said. Their role among the sophists, first of all, were Protagoras, Isocrates in Greece, and Cicero in Rome. Their role was to train statesmen, to train politicians, to train a good speaker, good orator, and the politician that would lead the people. It advocated for good public speaking skill. It also advocated for good legal case pleading, and also how to convey legal information, cultural information, things that matter daily. It is about the school of conveying the oral thought, and how it's best understood by the audience. Education is seen as an acquisition of a certain skills, and then once these skills are perceived and they're learned, they are stored as fact into one's mind. In contrast to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, who they thought that liberalism is just an intellectual education for statesmen and politicians. The intent of this school of thought is to produce the good and the virtuous person, and whose wisdom has to contemplate the truth and to constitute an ideal life. In other words, it equaled happiness, and it was about idealism. Happiness could be found in leisure, not in everyday affairs. In other words, if you could, one is able to understand leisure, one is able to understand liberal education and find happiness in the leisure, not in everyday affairs and problems. It proposed an education theory where service class did the work. In other words, it attempted to split between the service class and also the elite, the small and the few. So it was criticized by Dewey. For negativism towards vocational and utilitarian education for its class bias. Remember, this school of thought tended to split people between the trained, college-educated, and then the service classmen who would provide services and good to this special class who were trained and educated in college. Of course, Dewey, one of the founders of the progressivist thought, he was in he challenged this type of education because of its class biases. So, but what did liberal education, what did liberal adult education do to it? It sought to study rhetoric, the skills that one has and has stored in their brain in the argument and the knowledge of audience to be pursued. Of course, that can be mostly found in politicians and how they best pursue their audience. Throughout history, liberal education had suffered from elitist bias. Remember, this type of education sought to split the class between the trade and the educator and between the service class. It joins Christian faith to unite ascetical and moral education. In other words, Christianity was closely associated with this type of thought philosophy. It produced a cultural gentleman to fit citizenry demands and in the world of commerce and the worldly court. In other words, if we all can have a gentleman scholar who knows how to read, who knows how to speak, who knows how to pursue the audience, who knows how to convey a message that could be easily understood, they are the citizenry demands are fulfilled, and the world of commerce is already moving. However, it trained also for the church service. This is where the church, the faith, and the education were most closely associated with one another. And ultimately, it prepared person for life after death through Christian values of faith, hope, charity, and humility. In other words, people that thought that they believed in further life, they thought that the Christian values of faith, hope, charity, and humility could be obtained by learning on the framework of this philosophy. So let's talk about who are the main influencers. Erasmus, More, Luther, and Ignatius Loyola, they were among the major theorists who were associated with this type of thought. They were culture gentlemen, scholar fit. So what they argued about the culture gentleman, about the scholar fit for the demands of the world and the commerce. So let's tell an education should be a liberating experience. And in his words, this is what his intent was through this type of philosophy. Frinderberg, first function of liberal education is to teach the value of freedom and the competency. In other words, how do we achieve freedom? How do we best use it for our own effort? Second function of liberal education is to address appropriately the objective and the subjective. What is the factual and what is a world of constructed knowledge. The final purpose of liberal education was also to increase the range of human experience that one can respond to. In other words, the more experience we have, the better equipped we are to respond to the environment. Van Doren, liberal education, considered liberal education as the highest level of education that one could obtain, following, of course, the elementary and secondary schools and then college. John Vincent, he maintained that all life is educational, but the true basis of education is education received based on Christian faith. It envisioned education, mental, social, moral, and religious. In other words, it was not simply to learn about the knowledge, but also associated with Christian faith. Resurgence from 1920s on, it saw the resurgence of liberal education was needed amidst industrial. Remember, during industrial, you have a more progressivist thought come into how do we make sure that these people, how do we make sure that a citizenry is adequately prepared for the demands that industrial revolution demanded, and also how we can put everyone to work. So during this night, there was a little bit of fall of liberalism, but in the 1920s onward, we saw a resurgence. Then we saw two philosophical groups being classified: neo-rationalist and neo-thomist. Neo-rationalists, they maintain that religious philosophy of the human being, Hutchin, Adler, Hayes, and Van Doren. And neo-themists were the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas, a Catholic philosopher and also an educator. So what are the four components of liberal education? What made it so special? It was about rational intellectual education. It was about the mind, the moral, the spirit and religious, the belief, and the aesthetic sense, about the visual. So let's talk about the rational. It leads people from information to knowledge to wisdom. In other words, information leads to knowledge, and then knowledge leads to wisdom. Under moral education, it is a type of education that is based and not a direct education of will or an attempt of direct. It's an intellectual and moral task. We feel morally inclined and obligated to pursue education because we want to see a betterment of ourselves. Also, when we talk about spiritual or religious education, it's the highest goal to achieve internal freedom by questing goals of problem solving, social justice, and change through the fosterment of God and inculcation of Christian principle. Now remember, this school of thought was associated with Christianism. Therefore, one principle out of this philosophy was that education was achieved through learning principles and pillars that were found also in aesthetics, and appreciating beauty in nature and in arts to arrive in the truth, the good and the whole. In other words, just simply appreciating the art, the beautiful, we could also arrive to the truth. And remember, there is a truth in liberal education. Nothing is fully subjective. It's oriented towards more of a conceptual and a theoretical understanding than the transmission and absorption of facts or technical skill. Remember, liberalism initially was raised as a philosophy to educate people. However, progressivism was mostly focused on technical skills and development, and this is where the contrast between the two come. It contemplated and it had different intuitive approaches. Nothing was set in stone. Teachers were given prominent roles, and from whom they derived their authority by wisdom and their command of subject. In other words, the teacher was the authority. This is what they said. However, their ultimate goal is to empower students to be original and to be creative learners for their own sake. Therefore, it was seen. Therefore, education was seen to be it was an education of the liberal arts and not particularly of a training in a set of skills or techniques that could be later used in life. The Great Books program, which best represents these types of philosophy. Let's talk about it, what it is. A lot of people, of course, they contemplated it and they rejected and challenged this type of book. But what it is, it's an independent, non-profit organization that is designed to provide to all liberal education to all people of ages. It was developed at the Columbia University, at the University of Chicago, and St. John's College in Annapolis. However, what it sought to do is to give adequate basis for college students and adult education. It advocated the right and the wrong to different classic approaches, and book reading is not a passive act, but rather an intensive, active affair, that you don't simply just go through books and read them, but rather you engage with your book and with the content of the book. It was criticized that a core common book can provide an adequate education in contemporary society, which truthfully some had criticized, some have supported it, and one of the criticisms that I've heard about it is that it is not possible that a set of book could literally resolve all society's problems. However, they're still discussed, and critics have different views on it. What it also is that this type of program, they don't bring people to show the truth, but rather enables them and empowers them to grab intelligently the problem in place. In other words, people are more able to acquire the problem and understand the things associated with the problem rather than go to the truth of the problem. So, in conclusion, what is about liberal arts? So, it's an ideal college which emphasizes art of investigation, criticism, and communication through intimate acquaintance with the great books. In other words, the ones who truly want to pursue a liberal arts education must be able to gain knowledge through the Great Books program, should be able to read all the books to have a better understanding of the problems that they face in their daily lives. So it also produces people who are intellectually, morally, spiritually, and aesthetically literate. In other words, it doesn't matter whether you are simply knowledgeable about it, but the whole idea is to adequately prepare the student or the learner in a way that is intellectual, morally, spiritually, and aesthetically representative of that learning. In other words, they have a good balance between of these four types of learning. It was centered on humanistic studies, and it was often was perceived as a very intense intellectual activity. This was the point of it, to be perceived as intense intellectual activity. He argued that only liberal education, it fits the rigid canons of the educational activity found in the analytic tradition of philosophy. Later on, it stressed training of minds over the demands of preparing people for jobs and career. Of course, the whole idea is to prepare the minds so people are able to think more critically and more intelligently about the problem rather than acquire certain job skills about the career. Initially, it was an education for the elitist class. This was one of the problems, and that is also criticized because it sought to split people between the elite and the service class, the leaders and the aristocracy. So it did play a role, an increasing role in the future, and it will. It eventually will. We have some of the finest leading universities who have a more liberal approach, and then we do have some more conservative universities who have different approaches. So the school of thought will always be continuing. But most important, despite inspiration, its overall influence has been mitigated by two factors. The reason why is we've been going through it's because it's a movement toward career and technical education, and also the behaviorist approaches of mid-20th century in educational theory and practice. Now, remember, career and technical education is what Dewey, of a progressivist thought, sought to advocate. And when we have advancement and development, as we move forward, the more people are needed to have the necessary skills to adapt to this demand. Therefore, the influence of this type of philosophy will be mitigated because more and more people will acquire new skills to go into jobs that are going to be filled later on. Also, a lot of, depending on what critic you talk to, behaviorism was often criticized and more often than not supported. It's all the approaches that have been in psychology, in the world of commerce, they have also mitigated the impact of liberalist thought in liberalist thought of liberalism. Again, if you have any few questions that you think that you'd like to know a little bit more about, or if there is something that you are unclear about that I've talked to you about, please don't hesitate to contact me at indrit.vucai@okstate.edu, or you can visit my website at www.indritvucai.com. And remember, this is a great book. It's been around for a while, since 2006, and I actually am very grateful for this book. So just call or send me an email for anything you might have. Thank you.